Welcome to our channel Learning Math. In this video, we're going to learn how to multiply in square roots in addition to the comparison of square roots. Now let's start together. As you see, for example, if we have in general a radical b times c radical d, it's equal a times c radical b times d. What does it mean? When we want to multiply in square roots, we should multiply the numbers that are outside the radical alone and the numbers that are below the radical alone. Let's take an example to understand it more. If we have 3 radical 2 times 2 radical 6, how to write its answer? 3 times 2 is 6. Radical 2 times 6 is 12. So we multiplied the numbers outside the radical alone and the numbers below the radical with each other. Well, now 12, if you note, we can also simplify it. We can write it as 3 times 4, which is 2 squared. Well, so it's equal 6 radical 3 times 2 square. 2 square, we can write it outside the radical. Square cancels radical for 2. 3 sure remains below the radical. Now 2 times 6 is 12, so it's equal 12 radical 3. Another example. If we have 5 radical 3 times radical 18. Note that we can first simplify 18. We can write it as 2 times 9, 9 which is 3 squared. Well, 3 we can write it here outside the radical, so it will be 3 radical 2. So we can write it as 5 radical 3 times 3 radical 2. Now we multiply numbers outside the radical with each other. 5 times 3, 15. And multiply numbers below the radical with each other. So it's radical 3 times 2, which is radical 6. So it's equal 15 radical 6. Another example which is also very important. 5 radical 3 into 2 radical 6 minus radical 3. As you see here, we have parentheses. We have nothing between them, so it's times. Well, whenever we have parentheses, we should multiply all the terms in these parentheses by the number outside. So 5 radical 3 should be first multiplied by 2 radical 6, then by radical 3. Now let's start multiplying it. If you note, 5 times 2 is 10. Radical 3 times radical 6, it's radical 18. Now we should multiply 5 radical 3 by radical 3. 5 we can write it the same. There's nothing here as if it's 1. 1 times 5 is 5. Now radical 3 times radical 3 is radical 9, which is 3 squared. Also 18 we can simplify it. It's 2 times 9, which is 3 squared. So we can write them as 10 radical 2 times 3 squared minus 5 radical 3 squared. Here radical 3 squared is 3. 3 times 5, it gives us 15. Now here also 3 square. 3 we can write it outside the radical. Square cancels radical. 3 times 10 is 30. So it's 30 radical 2 minus 15. Sure, we cannot. Note that we can also multiply directly. For example, if we have here 5 radical 3 times 2 radical 15, we multiply numbers outside the radical. 5 times 2 is 10. Times radical 3 times radical 15 is radical 45. Then we simplify radical 45, which is 5 times 9. 9 is 3 squared. So we can write 3 outside the radical. 3 times 10 is 30. It's equal 30 radical 5. Another example, here 8 radical 5 times 2 radical 10. We multiply 8 times 2, 16. Radical 5 times 10, which is 50. You know we can write 50 as 25, which is 5 square, times 2. Now 5 we can write it outside the radical. 5 times 16 is 80, so it's equal 80 radical 2. Well, how to multiply if we have several terms? 3 radical 2 into 2 radical 5 minus 4 radical 3, for example. We should multiply 3 radical 2 by 2 radical 5, then by 4 radical 3. Here 3 times 2, 6, radical 2 times 5, which is 10, minus 3 times 4, 12. Radical 2 times radical 3 is radical 6. Why here minus? There's nothing in front of it, so it's a plus. Plus times minus gives us minus. Sure, we multiply sign by sign, number by number. Well, here we cannot simplify it anymore. Another example, we should multiply here minus 2 radical 5 by both 3 radical 10 and minus 7 radical 5. Here minus times a plus is minus. 2 times 3, 6. Radical 5 times radical 10 is radical 50. Then we can multiply it by minus 7 radical 5. Minus times minus plus. 2 times 7, 14. Radical 5 times radical 5, it's radical 25, which is 5 square. Also 50, we can write it as 2 times 5 square. Now we can directly simplify that. So here 5 times 6 is 30, so it's minus 30 radical 2. 2 sure remains below the radical, it's not squared. Plus here 5 times 14 gives us 70. Well, how to multiply if we are having in each parenthesis 2 or more terms? Here we should start multiplying 3 radical 5 by 2 radical 5, then by 3 radical 3 in the first case. Well, plus times a plus sure is a plus. 3 times 2, 6. Radical 5 times radical 5, it's radical 5 square, which is 25. Also, we multiply it by minus 3 radical 3. Here plus times minus minus. 3 times 3 is 9. Radical 5 times radical 3 gives us radical 15. Well, we have multiplied 3 radical 5 by all terms in this parenthesis. Now we should multiply radical 3 by all of these terms. Well, plus times a plus plus. Here as if it's 1. 1 times 2, 2. Radical 3 times radical 5, it's radical 15. Well, also we should multiply it by minus 3 radical 3 plus times minus. Minus 1 times 3 is 3. Radical 3 times radical 3 is radical 9, which is 3 square. Well, here we replace 25 by 5 square. Sure, if you note something, minus 9 radical 15 plus 2 radical 15, we can solve them later together. They are the same radical. Here also we can simplify 3 outside the radical. Square cancels radical. 3 times 3 is 9. So it's minus 9. Also here we can simplify square with radical. 5 times 6 gives us 30. So it's 30 minus 9 plus 2. It gives us, it will give us minus 7 radical 15. Also minus 9, we copy it. Now we can solve number with number. 30 minus 9 is 21. Also radical with radical. We solve the coefficients together. Minus 9 plus 2 is minus 7 radical 15. Now let's start by comparison of square roots. First case. How to compare if we have the same radical? When we have the same radical, we should directly compare the coefficients. Example, if we have 5 radical 6 and 10 radical 6, how to compare them? Note that we have the same radical, which is radical 6, then we can just compare 5 and 10, the coefficients. You know 5 is less than 10, then we can say that 5 radical 6 is less than 10 radical 6. Another example, minus 2 radical 5 and minus 3 radical 5. Same radical, we compare the coefficients minus 2 and minus 3. Well, you know that in negative numbers, the greater becomes the smaller. So minus 3 is less than minus 2. Note that minus 3 is farther than minus 2 from 0. So we can say that minus 2 is greater than minus 3, then minus 2 radical 5 is greater than minus 3 radical 5. Also, if we have minus 3 radical 2 and 2 radical 2, we compare the coefficients since we have the same radical 2. The coefficients are minus 3, which is negative, and 2, which is positive. Well, sure, negative numbers are less than 0 and also less than the positive numbers. So minus 3 is less than 2. Then minus 3 radical 2 is less than 2 radical 2. Well, second case, if we have the same coefficient, then we should compare the radicals. Let's take some examples. 4 radical 5 and 4 radical 7. We have the same coefficients for, then we compare radical 5 and radical 7. Actually, 5 is less than 7, then we can say that radical 5 is less than radical 7. So 4 radical 5 less than 4 radical 7. Another example, minus 2 radical 3 and minus 2 radical 10. Note that we have the same coefficient, minus 2. Then we should compare the radicals, radical 3 and radical 10. Well, actually 3 is less than 10, then radical 3 less than radical 10. But we have negative coefficients, and in negative numbers, the greater becomes the smaller. So minus 2 radical 10 will be less than minus 2 radical 3. So here we can say that minus 2 radical 3 greater than minus 2 radical 10. 1. So 3 less than 10, radical 3 is less than radical 10, then minus radical 3 greater than minus radical 10, actually minus 2 radical 3 greater than minus 2 radical 10. What about the third case? Sure, negative numbers are less than 0 and positive numbers are greater than 0. So we can say that negative numbers are less than positive numbers. The same is for square roots. If we compare a negative square root with a positive one, sure the negative is less than the positive. So minus radical 5 is less than radical 2. Fourth case, if we have positive square roots, both are positive, and different square roots, not the same radical. Well, how to compare them in this case? We should remove the radicals by raising them square and then compare. Let's take an example together. Compare radical 6 and 2 radical 3. Note that they are both positive. We neither have the same coefficient nor the same radical. Well, let's raise them squared, each term alone. Radical 6 square cancels radical, so it's equal 6. What about 2 radical 3 all squared? Well, the power 2 is not only for radical 3 but also for 2. We should distribute the power since here we have nothing between them, so it's times. In times we distribute the powers. So it's 2 squared times radical 3 squared. 2 squared is 4. Radical 3 square cancels radical, it becomes 3. So 4 times 3 equals 12. Well, which one is greater? Isn't 12 greater than 6? So we can say in this case that 2 radical 3 is greater than radical 6. Well, fifth case. In negative numbers, the number with greater numeration becomes the smaller. Let's see an example together. Actually, 7 greater than 3. So we can say that radical 7 is greater than radical 3. But in negative numbers, minus radical 7 will become less than minus radical 3 since it's further from 0 in the negative direction. What about the sixth case? Negative square roots. If we want to compare negative square roots that don't have neither the same coefficient nor the same radical, how to compare them? We also should remove the radicals by raising both terms squared, then we compare our answers. Well, here we have to compare minus radical 6 and minus 2 radical 3. Note that they are not having neither the same coefficient nor the same radical. Well, let's raise each term alone squared. Minus radical 6 all squared. You know minus, we have even power which is 2, so minus becomes plus. Square cancels radical, so it's plus 6. What about minus 2 radical 3? Let's raise it squared. Sure, minus, we have even power, it becomes plus. Now we distribute the power. 2 squared and radical 3 squared. Also here 2 squared is 4. Radical 3 square cancels radical, it becomes 3. So it's 4 times 3 equal 12. Plus we can write it at the beginning or not, it doesn't affect. Well, 12, if you note, is greater than 6. But we should keep in mind that we are comparing negative numbers. 12 greater than 6, it gives us as a positive, as a comparison of positive terms, 2 radical 3 should be greater than radical 6. But here we have minus 2 radical 3 and minus radical 6. Since we have minus, then the greater becomes the smaller. So minus 2 radical 3 is less than minus radical 6. Well, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe for the continuity of our channel to support you by more and more information with a great appreciation for your support.